Thank you. Thank you.
You can take it off if you want.
Okay. All right. These are called teaching sessions, but there's not really any teaching. But words are limited. We have to find some words to describe it. Teaching would mean that I'm adding something to you. Knowledge, information, facts, or an experience even. But that's not what this is about. It's not about adding anything to you. There's so much there already. More than enough. You have more information than the Buddha ever had. And of course, there are beautiful maps or signposts in existence, and that may be some of the spiritual information that you have. Beautiful maps and signposts in the form of ancient scriptures that point the way to the transformation of human consciousness. And here we are not using any of the existing maps or signposts, beautiful as they are, profound as they are. Many of which originated in this country, which could be called the birthplace of spirituality. Not that there's anything wrong with those maps, they are beautiful, those signposts. But every age creates its new signposts that corresponds to the needs of the age. The old ones can still work if used rightly, or they can become a hindrance if used wrongly. Now you may notice I use the word maps or signposts to describe ancient teachings, spiritual teachings. And why? What is a map is never it. The map is not the territory. The signpost is not the place to which it points. So all teachings, ancient or contemporary, point beyond themselves. And the essence of all teachings is the possibility of the transformation of human consciousness to a state that is free of bondage, free of suffering, free of conditioning. So the teachings point the way to that. And they are beautiful, because those genuine teachings came out of that transformed state of consciousness. Those few individuals in the past who became free of their conditioning, free of the false sense of self, false me, the egoic identity. They taught out of that state. The teaching arose out of that transformed state of consciousness. And so it has beauty and power. And it has such beauty often that these ancient teachings drew so much attention to themselves because they're so beautiful, and you can compare one map with another, one signpost with another. That people began to study, compare and collect maps and signposts and interpret them. And from then it was just a small step to forgetting that to which they point, because one became so absorbed in the form of the teaching. And not only that, after a while, when you began to love that signpost so much, that map so much, you had a sense of identity with it. And all those other people who also loved this signpost so much. And you could begin to argue with other groups of people who loved other signposts, forgetting that they point to the same place. And then you could carry, metaphorically speaking, the burden of signposts with you. That has happened, can still happen. And then it's also possible that a signpost, when there was readiness in a human being, he or she just needed to hear, to look once, twice, and immediately realize the truth of it. And it worked as it should. This teaching is relatively neutral culturally. It's not Buddhist, not Christian, not Hindu, and yet it embraces the essence of all of them. It is not rigid in its form. There's nothing to believe in. And the essence of this teaching, which is our gathering here this week, is the possibility of the transformation of human consciousness, your consciousness, so to speak. And since all language is limited, form is limited, these words are also signposts, of course. Since all form is limited, every word that I speak is also limited and isn't quite it. It's only one perspective on it. And even if I say the transformation of human consciousness, it's not quite true. No single statement that anybody makes can contain the truth. It is a perspective on it. This is good to know once you know that, so that you do not grasp one statement one perspective, identify with one perspective and say this is the truth. The transformation of human consciousness, yes, this is one perspective on it, but it implies then that something in you needs to change, become transformed before this new state arises. Something in you needs fixing. It implies that, but that's not true. Transformation of consciousness also implies that you need time for this change to happen. But that is not the case. So what is the essence then of that transformation of consciousness that doesn't need time? Is that possible? And here we come to the essence, and the only reason why we are here is to know that state of consciousness for ourselves, not as something that needs to be achieved in the future, but as something that is already in you now. Now, how do you know that beyond making it into another belief? Because you could adopt that belief when you hear certain teachings, they tell you you're already enlightened. And that could be a very satisfying belief to add to the content of your mind. And then for a while you could convince yourself that this is true. The teacher told me that nothing needs to change. I'm already enlightened. For a while, that adds a little bit to the mind-made identity, the mind-made sense of self, and you feel great. You finally made it. The mind-made sense of self always seeks to improve itself, to add something, to complete itself, to enhance its sense of self. And if you can catch a belief, a big, powerful belief that somebody gives you, and you can then add it to the accumulated content of your mind with which you identify as yourself, then that for a while is very satisfying. You've become big in that. The self has grown to an enlightened, me, the enlightened one. But it's only satisfying for a while, and then life will show you that that wasn't it, and maybe that was you're not quite enlightened yet. And then there's looking for the next thing to identify with, experience, another belief, more knowledge of real. Then you look for the real spiritual attainment to add to me. And so the striving away from who you already are continues. The movement towards future continues. The grasping, the continuous reaching out and grasping to complete yourself. Spiritually, materially, you've gone beyond that, perhaps, and now spiritually. relationships, maybe you've gone beyond that. Self-completion, the looking for that. And here comes this strange teaching that says, you can never find that in the future. And yet, don't believe me. If it is already the case, if you are already free, enlightened in your essence, then what is the difference between you and the spiritual master, if there is such a thing? Well, one could say the master knows this to be true and you don't know it to be true. Yes, but how do you know it to be true? How does that manifest? And it's very, very simple. It's not the case that the master knows more than you. Some masters may do. Other masters may be very simple people, little education. You know 1,000 times more than they do on the level of knowledge, but they know the one thing that matters, and you know many things. So the answer is simple, and I'll tell it to you now in case you want to leave, go home early. Because I don't want to build up this and say, I'm going to tell you the answer on day 6. The master is totally at one with this moment. He or she does not oppose internally this moment. He or she offers no inner resistance to this moment, to the isness of now, to whatever arises now. It is not resisted internally. And that is the end of all that is false in you. The entire egoic structure depends on your inner resistance to the suchness of this moment. It perpetuates itself, the mind-made sense of self perpetuates itself basically through its resistance. It is a state of resistance, a state of insufficiency, a state of continuous wanting or fearing the mental projection that you call future. Wanting and needing the future and something as something that comes towards you to add to me, to complete me, and fearing that something may arise in that mental projection that we call future that might diminish me. The two movements connected with future, the enhancement of one's sense of self, no matter what form that may take, that is looked for in and through future. That is why there's this enormous mental pull away from the aliveness and fullness of now into future, because what is being sought, the seeking is to add more. The future will complete you And this is true up to a point. You need future in your spiritual practice. I'm not completely saying this is all nonsense. No. You need for many people, spiritual practice implies a progressive movement towards the liberated state. But a point comes in your progressive movement where you suddenly realize the fallacy of time as far as the one thing is concerned that truly matters in your life, which is knowing who you are beyond form, finding yourself beyond mental constructs. Then suddenly you realize the fallacy of future as far as your spiritual liberation is concerned. But before you could realize that, you needed your spiritual practices. You needed time. You needed suffering. You needed, and spiritual practice is not necessarily spiritual practice in the conventional sense for people. Spiritual practice for many people means suffering. There are many people who have no spiritual teacher except suffering, and suffering is the greatest spiritual teacher. So they needed that, because there are two statements that are synonymous when I say you do not need time. This is not true for everybody. It is only true for that human being who can listen to that now and realize the depths and the truth of it. And we are only here to explore the depths and the truth of that statement for the whole week, which is time. We explore the timeless state of consciousness here. Something in you doesn't even like what I'm saying, perhaps in some of you, because you are still identified with time and the movement of time as the me that seeks completion through it. And if only that me, the little egoic self in you, listens to these words, it won't like that, because its very existence is bound up with time. So it is quite possible that some of you may, if you haven't been here before, may feel a strong impulse to leave. And there's nothing wrong with that. It simply means there's not yet the readiness to hear the simplicity of this truth and the depth of it that says you don't need time. And there is fear even to want to go more deeply into that statement to see what that means. There is fear. Who fears that? The time-bound sense of self fears that statement. And that's fine. That means you do not need more time is not true for you. It means you need more time. It's fine. But this also is connected to suffering. There's a synonymous statement with you do not need more time. It is the statement you do not need more suffering, which is the ultimate teaching of the Buddha, the end of suffering. You do not need more time implies you do not need more suffering. And again, this may be true for you or it may not be true for you. It is not a statement that is true for everybody. So whatever your spiritual practice has been, whether it's been through teachings or through suffering or a combination of both, the question is whether there is an inner readiness to hear these words and to, if only obscurely, sense the truth of these words. Not understand. If you start thinking about it, you won't get very far. You don't need more time is true, therefore is true and not true. And this is not satisfying to the mind. I will often say things that are true and not true. That pointer may be true for you or it may not be true for you. The mind doesn't like that. It says it is either true or untrue. And in science, this is the case. Well, has been until recently, until they discovered molecular physics and subatomic particles and see that they behave in such a way that those statements don't apply there anymore either. So the question then, do I need time? Do we need time for realization? The answer would be, you need time until you realize that you do not need time anymore. So all we are doing this week is to go deeper into this statement, to explore where this signpost, which is these words, to explore where this signpost points. You don't need more time. I don't need more time to be who I am, to be myself, fully, completely. How do I know that beyond making it into another belief? How do I know that beyond me giving you new practices that give you more time to practice, become good at, and then regard as an attainment, once you've become good at it, as an attainment you can add to yourself. It feels a little bit bigger through that. So how do you know it? You know it, and here, through entering into, and I'll say it now, it may frighten some of you, entering here, as this is our only practice this week, only one practice, entering into the surrendered state of consciousness that does not need more of anything. It does not need more of anything. Because if you need more of anything, even spiritual attainment, that is not the surrendered state of consciousness. If you need more knowledge, that is not the surrendered state of consciousness. If you need more experience, that's not the surrendered state of consciousness, let alone other basic, we know all the other things, status, possessions, money. If you need the psychological need for the next moment, which is deep in everyone, I need that inner reaching out to the next. What's next? What's next? That restless looking towards the next moment, which is part of the normal human state of consciousness. It's all the unsurrendered state of consciousness. The surrendered state of consciousness, and this is vital, and so I have to repeat this because it's easy to forget. More, you don't need more anymore to complete yourself. The more on the level of playing with phenomenal things is beautiful. You need, of course you need more food later today. You need more skills. You can learn a few more new skills. That's part of living in this form. But more in the psychological need for more, where the self needs to enhance itself through more, you realizing that is the unsurrendered state. And the last thing that people don't want to let go of is You even surrender the need to understand more. And then you go beyond, you go into the surrendered state of consciousness when you simply welcome the suchness of this moment, whatever form it takes. That at first looks like an absurd spiritual practice, because very often, well, in fact more often than not, this moment does not look all that satisfying. So to say, I totally surrender to the suchness of this moment, including all the, whatever I feel is not right with me, what I'm feeling at this moment, it may be restlessness, it may be anger, whatever it may be. What you mean, you want me to be stuck in this moment forever? But of course that's not what it is. And what better place to enter the surrendered state than India? And maybe this is why this country has produced more spiritual masters than any other. You have to surrender here. India teaches you to surrender. That is even without going to any teachers, it is a teaching in itself. The illusion that you can control the material universe, the illusion that out there's anything substantial that lasts, which you could have in the West, because you have substantial shopping malls and freeways and everything works, it all works. And it gives you the illusion it gives you the illusion that there's something lasting there, and this sooner or later even there reveals itself as an illusion. The shopping malls will crumble unless you crumble first, your physical form. It's insubstantial, but the insubstantiality of the physical is more apparent here. And the only way to be here, unless you want to suffer, is to surrender to what is. It doesn't mean you can't say, oh, could you please heat up this soup, or whatever. I prefer hot to cold, or whatever it is. You can say something and do something and initiate action, but in that, be surrendered, because it may not work. And whatever action arises, let it arise out of the state of alignment with the form that this moment takes. Even if it looks unsatisfying. During this week, sometimes the form that this moment takes will be beautiful. Oh. And then the next moment, or rather the next form that this one moment, the only moment there is, takes, may be not beautiful. It may be a limitation on your freedom. For most of you, or all of you, unless you are ascetic practitioners, where you are now is not as comfortable as your home. Facilities you haven't got, so you have limitations on your life here. that you may not have at home. You have others there. You have limitations on your life here, physical even. The food may be strange. Many kinds of limitations. And so there is, you can observe the reactivity of the little me that says no to what is internally and wants to be somewhere else, or blames or criticizes or complains in the head about the form that this moment takes. That is the unsurrendered state. That is how the egoic entity survives through resistance. And it can get very strong here if you don't know how it operates. So our spiritual practice here during this week is just be watchful and alert and ask yourself, observe yourself internally, am I in the surrendered state or the unsurrendered state of consciousness? The unsurrendered state denies, resists, or tries to get away from what is. The surrendered state has surrendered its need for more, has surrendered its need for this moment to be different from what is, because it has recognized that what is already as it is. And it has recognized the futility of resisting that internally. It embraces the suchness of this moment, whatever form this moment takes. You do not demand that the form that this moment takes should be different from what it is. You do not oppose that. What happens when you no longer demand that the form that this moment takes, and please observe this little signpost I'm giving you when I say the form that this moment takes. Because this moment is eternal, there's only this eternal one now. Never changes, it cannot, remains eternally as now. What appears in it is the world of form. A form of life appears in the vastness of the field that is the eternal now. In this vastness, forms appear. And they appear, and that is the appearance of this moment. The form that arises, a situation, a place, an event, a person, comes, it's happening now. Of course it's happening now. Nothing can happen that is not now. Whatever happens must happen in this eternal field of now. We cannot fully understand through the mind what that means, but it is an amazing realization that there is nothing that is not now. To be and now, life and now are totally synonymous, totally one. Nothing has ever happened that wasn't now. Nothing can ever happen that is not now. How? Future moment can only appear as now. Otherwise it has no reality except a mental projection. And when is it happening? Now. And the memory of a past moment, there is no such thing really of a past moment, as there is no such thing as a future moment. There's only form that it takes. There's only one moment, which is now, one eternal now. Now, the form that this now takes changes, the form that appears in it, as you go through life, a continuous flux of forms. Now, most people, all they know is the forms that arise in the now. They have a relationship with those forms, which is either a relationship of desire or a relationship of fear. They want to have these forms, or they have aversion towards these forms. And you can observe this week, how the good things come to you, how beautiful, the river, the holy river, the sunset. And the next moment, there's something dreadful happens. It's the now, it's not really the next moment. Even I use those words sometimes because language works in that way. There's no such thing as the next moment. The form that the moment takes then changes. So most people, all they relate to is the forms that arise in the now, and their relationship is one of fear or desire. They fear or desire those forms, aversion or attraction towards these forms, because all they know is the forms. What they don't know is the now, beyond the forms. And this doesn't make sense to the mind either. This is a signpost that points you. The truth of this cannot be understood through thought, because the transformed state of consciousness is beyond thought. This is where we are now moving. Let's see what happens when, as is the normal in the normal state of consciousness, when you resist internally or deny or run away from internally, from the isness of now, the form that this moment takes, the reaction against it, the reaction against the form that this moment takes as an inner contraction, an inner no, an inner running away from it, it strengthens the form identity in you that is the mind-made self, identified with mental, emotional forms, content of your mind. The mind-made self, the me, with its experiences and its conditioning, its knowledge. It strengthens its form identity through reacting to other forms. So you get trapped in the world of form when you are in a reactive relationship towards what arises in the now. And to be in a reactive relationship, which is desire or fear, is part of the normal state of consciousness. And the reactive relationship to the world of form is what keeps the me, the egoic entity, going. The more, every time you react against, your form identity contracts and strengthens as the me. You feel stronger in your sense of self. And you can notice it in yourself when you argue with somebody and you're trying to be right. And this is a very common example of strengthening your sense of self by identifying with a mental position and fighting some other mental position there. So you're reacting to form. Or an event comes into your life, a person comes, a situation comes, and there's a reaction, or there's you strengthening your form identity through the reactivity to form. And that's how it keeps the world going. That keeps that state of consciousness going. To go beyond that, and it only works if you were not ready, you wouldn't even want to listen to this. The fact that you sit here and listen means the readiness is there. The readiness to go beyond that and enter the state of non-resistance, enter the state of surrender, of welcoming whatever form arises. This is our spiritual practice, and this is the best place to practice it in. We are here, welcoming whatever form arises, inner as an emotion, a feeling, or outer form, because it is, it already is. You say yes to that. You are not You are no longer in a personalized relationship to whatever arises. You embrace what arises through that yes. It is. Embrace. And what happens when you embrace the form of this moment? You become who you already are. You become, and I'm only using pointers, the pointers are not it. Words. You become who you already are and what you already are. You become very deep and spacious as you allow the world of form to arise and to subside in that field of now. There's a great sense of spaciousness now around this form that arises, this event, this person, this thing. It is not resisted. And suddenly, one could also say there's suddenly a vast peace around it, no matter what it is. The form itself may not be peaceful. The form itself may be a limitation on your physical form. It may even be a limitation on your psychological form of me. But it is allowed to be. The limitation is not resisted. Let's say you are trapped in a cold room. And it's just a simple example. And that form that this moment takes, which is how the body feels, is simply allowed to be. Any condition is simply allowed to be. And suddenly, there's this vast space around the condition. Anything that is, you can practice that with anything that is uncomfortable in your life, and there may be things here because you will probably be more comfortable at home, and sometimes you may wish you were at home in your comfortable armchair watching television, having your favorite drink, a meal, and all this is gone here, and suddenly there's a limitation. There is a discomfort that arises somewhere. There may even be pain. But just talk about a little thing like a discomfort that arises. And so you can react. So the discomfort becomes a reaction which leads to mind movements, which strengthens the me. Because the me has made the moment, the now, into its enemy, and it gets stronger through that, through the mind movement and the emotional movement that makes the now into its enemy, and you can complain about it in your head. Why did I ever come here? I shouldn't. They shouldn't. Why don't they? So that the discomfort reacted against is denied, resisted, and mind movement begins. Emotions that accompany that mind movement flow into and strengthen those mind movements, and it's all connected. Your sense of self gets stronger in that, and you're complaining inside your head, and maybe to somebody else. I'm not saying you can't complain in the sense of telling somebody to change this from here, to do that, but I mean the psychological complaining. And many people live in a constant state of that. There are marriages, people living, husbands and wives, who are in a constant state of mental complaining about their husband or their wife. It's so normal they don't even know it anymore. For 30 years they've been complaining in the head. It's their normal state. But it's with everybody. It's like that. It may not be in your marriage. May not be like that, but some are. Quite a few are. So a discomfort arises, and instead of the reactivity strengthening the egoic entity that needs its enemies to feel I'm me, if only the enemy is this little situation that creates discomfort, that will do. Any enemy will do to strengthen the self, the me. And of course, when you complain, you are right, and the situation is wrong. That is the essence of the complaint, the inner complaint. I am right. Either the person, or it may not be a person, the situation is wrong. That's the nature of complaining. You're putting yourself in a position of rightness, me right, a mental position. You are then, your sense of self becomes identified with that mental position of rightness, and therefore you're under the delusion, it's all unconscious, that you're more yourself now. It feels great, I'm against something. And it's unconscious. People don't know that this is how the self, the false self, perpetuates itself. How it loves all the things it complains about. It needs them. So it's looking out for the next thing it can complain about. Right. And then what happens then if suddenly there's a shift, the discomfort arises, whatever it may be, and is met in that state of yes. It's allowed to be. The discomfort is there and is allowed to be. And you embrace it. You say, all right. And that continues as a little movement, the discomfort movement, cold, a little pain here, whatever it may be, pain there, water is cold, what, who knows? And it's allowed, and there the discomfort continues. And you continue to simply be with it. And suddenly, there is something more than that, or that little me. Then what happens now is not something that one can put into words, because you go beyond form now. There is a space around the discomfort. And you can do that with any bodily condition, any physical condition. Just stay with that. And suddenly there's a sense of spaciousness around it. And that is an enormous peace around that. And the discomfort is still there. So the discomfort is any form of pain, suffering. You're simply allowing it to be as it is. Allowing it to be as it is. So this is great that we have some discomforts here. Theoretically, one could have a retreat center that is so comfortable, everything works totally perfectly to satisfy all your needs, just the right temperature, the thermostat works perfectly, the water is just right, the environment is totally soothing and peaceful. You get a massage 3 times a day. The most exquisite food, just the right amount. Some celestial music in the background sometimes. Maybe one day, and it may be in California, they may create such a center. Wow, wouldn't that be great? And yet, there wouldn't be very much spiritual practice there. It doesn't come in that way. Here you have the natural things that arise in an environment that to many of you is foreign and strange, and many things arise here. In others, there are schools like Zen monasteries where they consciously make your life as uncomfortable as possible, where you get very little food, it's cold, they open the windows and you meditate all night in this painful position, facing a wall with cold wind blowing in and an empty stomach. And then you can watch what arises in the now. And it may perhaps at one point you give up your resistance because you can't stand the pain of the resistance anymore. There is more to it than the form of this moment. You're suddenly aware of a vast space around this temporary form that includes the physical body. And that is, some people have described it as enormous peace suddenly around. In the same awful place, the monastery, whatever it was, and there in the midst of that spaciousness, there's the physical pain, there's the empty stomach, there's the discomfort. It's there somewhere, it's not a self anymore, there is that discomfort, there is that feeling of empty stomach, and yet there is no me in it. It's just there. So your sense of self is no longer in the form, the psychological form or the physical form. Your sense of self, whereas in some traditions they now say you have discovered no self. The self has dissolved, which is true. The false self has dissolved through entering the surrendered state. The false self has dissolved. And what arises then is, Buddhists may call it emptiness, or it may be called the self, the one, the unconditioned one consciousness, out of which the whole universe comes, out of which every phenomenon comes. That remains, and there it is, not known in a subject-object relationship, known as yourself. Not that which arises, but the field in which everything arises is who you are. You are not that which happens in the now. You are the field of now. That's the depth of what now means, the eternal. Now is the eternal, unchanging one. And it's so easy to know that as the essence of who you are, and you can see how absurd it is to look for it in the future. The essence, eternal presence, the essence of who you are, to look for it in the future. So that's why this spiritual practice does not require time. And yet, and there's always a paradox whenever we speak about it, because all language is to do with time and the phenomenal world. And yet, we are here for 1 week, which is time. A whole week exploring that which is beyond time. Sounds paradoxical almost. Why do we need a whole week to explore the timeless? Well, maybe you don't need it anymore. Maybe it's once or twice it's happened that people have walked out and later contacted me and said, I'm the person who walked out after 10 minutes of your talk because I realized the truth of it and I don't need to come anymore. That realization, of course, may be true or false. If it's only a mind movement, life will soon tell you that, oh, this is not the surrendered state. I'm shouting and screaming at my wife. Is that the surrendered state? So, our practice then is allowing this moment to be simple. The rest happens by itself. And there is enormous intelligence in this field of now. It is the essence of all intelligence. The mind is a tiny aspect of that vast intelligence that is in the field of now. And one more pointer. As you surrender to now, whatever form this now takes, the incessant mental noise that we call thinking, 90% of which is unnecessary, slows down. Because a large part of the compulsive streams of thinking that most people are identified with as me, as themselves, completely identified with those continuous streams of thoughts. And the reason why those thought streams have an addictive quality, a compulsive quality, is because your sense of self is in them, a me, your identification with those thought streams as a me. And the me wants to sustain itself, so it can't stop. And the me can only perpetuate itself through non-surrender and resistance, and that gives fuel to the compulsion to think, because it's an expression of the non-surrendered state. You're trying to control things somehow. And so you lie awake at night for 2-3 hours trying to work it out, control your life, fear what might come, rehearse something, project fantasies. With entering this surrendered state, the mental noise slows down by itself. When you say yes to what is, mental noise will begin to subside. Still there to some extent, but you're not in a fighting mode anymore towards the universe. And it's to be in a fighting mode towards the universe is what creates that enormous momentum that is behind compulsive thinking. It comes in waves and waves and waves. And there's always a me in it. And so with the surrendered state, that calms down so that you don't need to stop your mind. That creates another problem. Just be with what is allow this moment to be, then the mind stops by itself. Because it's not compatible, compulsive thinking, with allowing this moment to be. And when the mind subsides, that continuous stream of thinking, there's the spaciousness. There's this stillness that is underneath the mental noise. In everyone, it's already there. And that is none other than that spaciousness that is there, beyond the form that this moment takes. And that stillness, again, every label is so limited. Every signpost is limited. Stillness, spaciousness, awareness that does not need thought, beyond thought. Thought can arise in it, but it is beyond thought. Vast intelligence, unconditioned. What humans think of as intelligence is the ability of the mind to solve puzzles, to store knowledge, to analyze information. It's very limited. The entire universe is an external expression, in the manifested expression of vast intelligence, expressing itself as form, and most of it comes out of stillness. The flowers come out of stillness, exists in stillness, that beauty that no mind could create. Entire galaxies coming out of vast stillness. They say the universe came about, the scientists say there was a big bang when the universe out of one point suddenly exploded into existence. And then they ask, what was before then? And then their mind stops. Well, it doesn't stop, but thought cannot reach there. What was there before the universe was there, before the Big Bang? That state of the unmanifested is still in you. It's never gone away as your essence. The Big Bang happens continuously. The universe comes into existence every moment. Don't think about that. Ultimately, this is now that there's a strong evolutionary impulse now on this planet that is forcing humanity to evolve into a state that before was the privilege of very few individuals here and there. They were the early flowerings of consciousness. But it is a destiny of all humans to express this flowering, to be openings for this flowering of consciousness to happen. So where the person, you come here as a person, which is the caterpillar, and then, but you're already ready to go beyond that. Then the person was there, and it's become dense and heavy in its last stages of personal selfhood, and then the person gives way, just as the caterpillar dissolves as caterpillar, and out comes this incredible, beautiful being. The person gives way to the flowering of human consciousness. Yes, you're still here in a physical form, but something far greater has emerged through this form. And this is why we're here, to go beyond this absurdly limited sense of self, with me, with my little bit of past and my little bit of history, my little story, and a pathetic little bit of future that I think is going to complete me. And there's so little, even for those who are young, it's not much. How can I complete me in those few years? What can I possibly add to me to make me complete? It's an illusion. So to go beyond that absurdly limited sense of self to the vastness that you actually are, not as a limited me anymore. You simply then become an expression of that, and it emanates then through this form. And so, this is the only way now the planet can be saved, is human consciousness to become transformed. Until recently it's been a luxury, that transformation. A few here and there. And now we have to. This is why it's happening. And we encounter a state of consciousness that is beyond thought, characterized by deep, vitally alive stillness. And out of that, thought can still come. And those thoughts that come out of that are inspired thoughts, new thoughts, realizations. Thought is form, and this is the formless. Knowing yourself as the formless, and then move through the world of form and enjoy that. This is the first time. It's only when you know yourself to be beyond that, not through some idea, but through being in the surrendered state. It's only then that you can enjoy the world of forms, truly. When you are no longer in a personalized, reactive relationship to the forms that arise in your life, in the now, of course, then you no longer desire nor fear any particular forms. You enjoy the dance of form. And you may contribute to it, you may create new forms. They come out of presence, not because egoic need to complete itself. So a completely different doing happens. Completely different motivation for doing. No self-seeking through doing, not trying to get to some future point where you're going to complete yourself, and if you don't get there, you'll be unhappy. And if you do get there, you'll also be unhappy. Of course, many of these things, they've been pointed to in ancient teachings. There's the Bhagavad Gita, a beautiful, one of the most beautiful signposts, the path of surrendered action, where the action, the doing, is not a means to an end. That is surrendered action. The doing is not inferior to some mentally projected result that you want to achieve and thereby enhance your sense of self. Surrendered action is never a means to an end. It is sufficient unto itself. So your practice is be watchful of this moment. It's always this moment. A limited way of putting it would be to say, what is your relationship with this moment? That's in ultimate terms. It's not. You don't have a relationship with this moment. You are this moment. But in a from a more limited perspective, you could ask yourself, what is my relationship with this moment, or the form that this moment takes? Surrendered or resistant? And you watch. And as you watch, many times you can watch non-surrender arising. And then you watch non-surrender as a physical contraction, as an emotional movement, or as mental judgments. Often the three go together. Physical contraction, the emotion, and some mental judgment that says something about now, or a total projection away from now. And you see yourself in your favorite restaurant at home, having a meal there. And suddenly you come back to, oh. If you observe yourself in a non-surrendered state, that's all that's necessary. And allow that to be. Physical contraction. Oh, look at that. Nothing personal in it. It's the human state. Allow it. So it's as whenever a no arises in you, a no to what is, and you suddenly see it, accept it. So the yes, you bring the yes into the no, always. You cannot fight non-surrender through more non-surrender or trying to achieve a surrendered state. It's enough to know that you are not surrendered. That is the arising of presence. That is the arising of the unconditioned consciousness. And there that can allow. It allows that. Right. And then something happens to the non-surrendered state because it is not compatible with surrender. Of course, many teachings speak of surrender to God. And of course, this is what it is. You can only surrender to God by surrendering to the form that this moment takes. When you ask, well, God couldn't possibly have created this dreadful form that this moment takes, this situation. It's a limitation. I want to know myself as unlimited, and here I'm faced with limitation wherever I look. That's the form that this moment takes. The form that this moment takes cannot not be a limitation. Even if it looks like great, after a little while the great has become a limitation on you. Look at the West, it's become very wealthy and prosperous, and at first it means I'm now unlimited, I can buy whatever I like. And then you buy more, and another visit to the shopping mall, and another visit, and another, and suddenly all the things that you've bought have become a limitation on you, and everything is suddenly, buying doesn't fulfill you anymore. And then you walk around the shopping mall depressed. So in the world of form, what looks sometimes like, now this form has come and freed me, always turns out to be another limitation. Because it is form, and all form is limitation. So to project some situation mentally where you are going to be free of all limitations is absurd. It is not in the nature of the world of form to be free of limitation. It would be a contradiction in terms. Form is limitation. So wherever you go, you encounter limitations, and every time you think, now this will free me, this person will make me happy, in other words, unlimited, then this very person that was supposed to make you happy will be the greatest limitation on your life. So it's not seeking where it cannot be found. So it's not by running away from the limitations, but by finding a new relationship towards the limitations. And that new relationship towards the limitations, not that you can't take action to improve things and paint your house, or no, but a new relationship towards the limitations in your life, from one of feeling bad about them and thinking there must be some other situation that's better than this. Well, maybe try another one, and then the same arises again. Okay, try some other place, go live somewhere else, and after a while the same arises. Okay, well, now just say yes to this. The very limitation becomes an opening through the yes. That's the beauty of it. What before looked like a universe that was there to frustrate you, how could God allow this? The universe looks, if it was there, just designed to frustrate you. And that's how some people live, in such a reactive relationship. They're so angry that everything is just designed to make my life difficult. That's how it seems. And then your relationship changes towards what is. And you allow it. And there's the limitation, whatever it may be, big, small, discomfort, a little discomfort here, a little cold there, or prison cell around you, fairly big limitation, physical condition of the body limiting you, can't move anymore, can't move fast anymore, who knows. Sooner or later, limitations will come. Big ones will come too. Form, it's form. And so it's not resisted anymore. Then something opens up where there before was limitation, becomes an opening into the formless and the unlimited. You've walked through the limitation by yes. This is the cross, the meaning of the cross. Crucifixion means limitation, at highest degree of limitation. Can't move anymore. Totally limited. And then surrender happens. In the face of the unacceptable. And suddenly the cross becomes a symbol of the divine. The torture instrument becomes a symbol of the divine there. And there's deep wisdom, no matter, you don't have to be a Christian to see the wisdom that is embedded in that. One of the deepest symbols of humanity, and in most churches they don't understand it at all. They don't understand the depth of it. They make it into some formal belief structures. But the depth of it is to see that the non-duality that is there of the divine and the world of form, of the limited and the unlimited. They are one. It's through the world of form that the divine is reached, by going through it, not running away from it. So, to know this is our spiritual practice. To go deeper and deeper into this is our spiritual practice. This week, use, of course there's great beauty here too, and there are limitations on you. Use them wisely in your practice. Use this moment wisely, rightly. It's precious. It's the only one there is, ever. We will meet again in the now. The hands of the clock will have shifted and show the 3:30 position, but it'll still be now. We may also have, as we go into this week, periods of silence. Thank you.